When it seems like love will last forever, betrayal hits the hardest. 20 years of marriage, trust built on honesty, and then the bitter shock of a fleeting affair spiraling into disaster. His friends warned him, but he didn't listen, not until the truth hit like a hammer. One night, one wrong step, and now his revenge is relentless, her life in ruins. This story delves into what happens when sacred vows are broken and what follows when betrayal doesn't go unanswered. Hey, dear friend, before you hear this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's been 20 years since Penelope and I vowed our love to each other. We started dating when she was a freshman in college, and I was a year ahead. My name is Michael Scott, and from our first encounter at a college party, we both sensed a special connection. We were inseparable for 3 years until I graduated. After graduation, we faced a year of separation while Penelope finished her studies. Despite the distance, we knew we would marry as soon as she graduated, and we stayed committed to each other. A year after our wedding, we found ourselves at a barbecue with several other couples around our age. As the evening drew to a close and most guests had left, only 4 couples remained around the fire. Eventually, the conversation turned to the topic of a celebrity-free pass. I remember feeling confused and asking, "What's a celebrity-free pass?" Nora, a petite blonde sitting nearby, leaned in with a smile and explained, "It's just a game where you pick a celebrity you'd hypothetically be allowed to have a fling with, even if you're married." "So it's purely hypothetical?" I clarified, not understanding where this game could lead. Nora smiled and replied, "Well, it's mostly for fun, but Benjamin and I took it a step further. We agreed to a real pass for each of us, and it doesn't even have to involve celebrities." I was stunned by how casually she spoke about it. "Wait, are you saying you actually have an agreement allowing each other to be with someone else if the opportunity arises?" I asked, trying to wrap my head around it. Benjamin nodded, smiling. "Yeah, buddy. It's a bit more complicated, but that's the gist." He gestured to the other couples. "We're all in on it. We agreed together." Then he looked at Hannah, one of the wives, and asked, "You used yours, right?" Hannah looked embarrassed and quietly answered, "Ben, let's not get into that." But she eventually admitted, "Yes, I met someone at a conference, a widower. I called Henry and told him I'd use my pass." Penelope, who had been silently listening, squeezed my hand a bit tighter and leaned toward me. I turned to Henry and asked, "Are you really okay with this? With Hannah seeing someone else?" Henry nodded, seemingly at peace. "Yes, it's fine with me. She came back, and maybe someday I'll take my chance too." The conversation continued, and each of us named our celebrity candidate for a hypothetical pass. Penelope nudged me to pick someone after she made her own choice. I can't remember who we chose, but I vividly remember the intense evening that followed when we returned home. At one point, Penelope confessed she'd been thinking about her ideal fantasy partner. The next morning, I felt the need to set a boundary. I told her I'd never agree to a real pass. She agreed, assuring me it was just a game of fantasy. That night eventually faded from memory, and life went on. We built a family and soon became parents to a son and daughter. For a while, we stayed in touch with Nora and Benjamin, but then our connection waned as their marriage fell apart. A year ago, I ran into Benjamin by chance at a bar. He was sitting alone with a drink, and we struck up a conversation. Benjamin admitted that he and Nora had divorced, and the other 2 couples from that night had also split up. He mentioned that each of these stories might have had something to do with the free pass agreement. Initially, they thought it would add excitement to their relationships without affecting the bonds they shared, but, as Benjamin admitted, they couldn't have been more wrong. Every time someone used their pass, it bred jealousy and suspicion that grew into resentment and ultimately destroyed each marriage. That conversation with Benjamin only confirmed what I'd sensed back at that party. While the idea of a celebrity-free pass might seem like harmless fun, the reality is completely different. In real life, it just doesn't work. I was planning to tell Penelope about that awkward encounter I had with Benjamin, but life swept me up in a whirlwind, and the right moment never came. Now, sitting here, I bitterly regret it. It was Friday evening, and Penelope was at a conference in another city. Just after midnight, my phone lit up with her call. Judging by the background noise, she was somewhere crowded and loud, possibly in a club. Her voice was noticeably slurred from alcohol. "You won't believe who I just met," she said with a laugh. "Sebastian from my favorite show. He's in love with me, and I'm going to use my free pass." The noise on her end grew louder, becoming increasingly chaotic. "Wait, what did you just say?" I asked, not believing my ears. Laughing, she repeated, "Yes, darling, you heard me. I knew you'd understand. See you on Monday." I was stunned. "Hold on, what are you even talking about? Penelope, can you hear me?" But the line had already disconnected. I immediately called back, but each time I went straight to her voicemail. In desperation, I left messages, begging her to reconsider before doing something we'd both regret. Through these messages, I tried to convey the gravity of a broken vow and explained that it would have serious consequences. By morning, with no response, I kept trying to reach her, only to be met with silence. Saturday was torture. My mind was filled with thoughts of Penelope alone in an unfamiliar city, perhaps making choices that could shatter our marriage. After work, I took the kids to my parents' house and, feeling a growing sense of despair, went over to my friend Mason's. Mason's wife, Eleanor, was at the same conference as Penelope, and they were close. When Mason opened the door, he looked surprised to see me. "Hey, Mason," I said, feeling the weight settle on me. "I really need your help." I explained how Penelope's call had left me anxious, and now I couldn't find her. "Could you ask Eleanor if she's seen Penelope and knows what's going on?" I asked. "Of course, Michael," Mason replied reassuringly. "I'll call Eleanor and tell her you're worried about Penelope." "Wait, please don't mention that I'm here," I quickly interjected. "I'm worried that Penelope might have asked Eleanor to keep everything secret. Can you just ask casually, so she doesn't know I'm listening?" Mason nodded. "All right, man." The conference was likely wrapping up, and as Mason took out his phone, I discreetly turned on my voice recorder. Eleanor picked up almost immediately. "Hi, honey," she said cheerfully. "Wow, you're right on time. I just got back to the room. We've got dinner tonight, but I'll see you on Monday." They exchanged a few words about the conference, and then Mason carefully steered the conversation. "Hey, did you happen to see Penelope? Michael left me a message asking if you knew where she was. Just curious." Eleanor's tone grew subdued. "Don't tell him we talked," she said. "The last time I saw her was last night. We were all drinking, and that actor from her favorite show, Impossibly Handsome, came over to our table." Eleanor shared that Penelope had asked the actor for an autograph, and after that, they danced together a few times. At some point, Penelope mentioned something about a free pass with Michael, and the actor seemed open to taking her up on it. Eleanor said she tried to dissuade Penelope, but Penelope just brushed her off, claiming it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Eleanor continued, saying that Penelope even hinted she planned to spend the night with him and left the club with him, arm in arm. "Please don't tell Michael," she added. When Mason finished the conversation, he looked at me, his eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm really sorry, man," he said quietly. "Do you and Penelope actually have an agreement about a free pass?" "No," I replied, barely holding back my frustration. "We joked about it at the beginning of our marriage, but then I made it clear that it was just a joke and nothing more." Mason hesitated, unsure what to say. "So, what are you going to do next?" As I was driving home, a vague sense of unease crept over me. Almost automatically, I stopped by my parents' house and asked my mother to watch the kids for the weekend. She immediately sensed that something was wrong but didn't ask any questions. Back at home, I tried reaching Penelope again, calling, texting, but she didn't respond. Her phone seemed deliberately switched off to avoid distractions while she spent the night with that soap opera star. On Monday, Her plane was due to land around noon, and since Eleanor was flying with her, I asked Mason to let me know when Penelope dropped her off. I discreetly set up a video camera on the living room shelf, intending to capture her reaction to the conversation I planned. At 3:20 p.m., I got Mason's message that Penelope had dropped off Eleanor. There were about 10 minutes left. I hid the camera remote under my foot and waited for her return, my heart pounding as I heard the garage gate open. I pressed record, trying to maintain my composure. Penelope entered the room through the kitchen, her bag swinging carelessly from her shoulder. "Oh my God, that trip was incredible!" she exclaimed, radiating energy. "I'm sure it was," I replied evenly. "I tried reaching you," I said. "Oh, my phone broke. It slipped out of my hands and shattered," she replied. I held back and asked why she had called me late on Friday. "The last time I heard from you, your voice was barely audible." "Oh, that!" she laughed, her eyes lighting up. "Sebastian Hill, you know, the actor from my soap opera? He came over to our table at the club. We started talking about our agreement, remember? That whole permission we had discussed." She continued, her face glowing as she recounted. "He's so handsome. He actually suggested using that permission with him. That's why I called you. He's been with so many famous actresses, yet he wanted me." She shook her head, laughing in amazement. "Can you believe it? He invited me over and, well, I doubt you want the details." Struggling to keep my voice steady, I replied, "On the contrary, I'd love to hear how this actor charmed my wife, using techniques he's perfected on dozens of other women." Completely oblivious to my irritation, she went on with a naive, almost childlike enthusiasm. "Oh, he knew exactly what he was doing. A real professional. He even mentioned taking something for endurance. Honestly, you could use a tip from him. He just didn't stop." Penelope was still beaming, completely engrossed in her story when she finally noticed my expression and froze. "Michael, is something wrong?" "Not something. Everything is wrong," I replied, tension filling my voice. I'm standing here listening to my wife, thrilled, as she recounts a night spent with another man, with not a hint of regret. She looked at me, genuinely baffled. "Wait, what? This isn't cheating, Michael. It was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Sebastian was my permission. I thought you'd be happy for me, that I got to fulfill my dream." "A dream? Do you really believe this was just some harmless fantasy?" I replied, raising my voice. "Do you honestly expect me to be glad that you dismissed everything our marriage is built on?" A look of worry appeared on her face. "Michael, I didn't break any promises. It was just a weekend, a chance to live out a dream, just like we agreed, like our friends. It was only permission." "Penelope, no. It was just a dream, nothing more, and I made that perfectly clear to you," he said firmly. "I promised you I would never break our wedding vows, and I expect the same from you. If you had been with a famous woman, I would have supported you, but I don't understand why you can't just be happy for me. It was a unique experience for me," she replied. "Oh, don't worry. None of us will be forgetting this anytime soon. Especially not the family you ignored," he countered. Stepping closer, he took her hand and slipped her wedding ring off her finger. "Did you leave this on while you were with him? This symbol of our love?" he asked with pointed seriousness. "Did you—" "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "Yes, we shared an intimate moment. And yes, I kept the ring on. I thought about taking it off, but Sebastian asked me not to." "Of course he did," he replied bitterly. "He wanted you, a married woman, to keep your ring on while you were with him." Penelope stood proudly, one hand on her hip, her usual stance when upset. "I don't understand why you're making this such a tragedy. It was just a couple of nights," she retorted. "What? Do you want me to take you upstairs and make it up to you?" "No, thank you." His eyes were cold, full of disdain. "And I bet your soap opera prince didn't use protection, did he?" Her irritation gave way to uncertainty. "Well, no," she admitted reluctantly. "You let a man be with you without protection? A man who's likely been with countless others? Possibly even men being on television? He challenged. Did you consider he might be unhealthy? And tell me, are you back on contraceptives? Or did you ignore that too? No, I'm not back on the pill, she replied defensively. You know that. Oh, of course, he said, dripping with sarcasm. Because up until now there was no need. Until this moment. Penelope's eyes widened, and she gasped, understanding his implication. Imagine, you might be carrying a famous actor's child, he added with bitter irony. She seemed to be calculating dates in her head, muttering, No, I had my period just last week. I won't be fertile until the end of this week. Funny how that didn't occur to you sooner, he replied coldly. That actor could have left you a surprise even if you weren't ovulating. How many times were you with him without protection? Michael, you're blowing this way out of proportion, she snapped. Blowing it out of proportion? He echoed incredulously. Are you saying I shouldn't be concerned about my wife's infidelity and the threat it poses to our family? She stamped her foot, her anger flaring. This wasn't infidelity. I used my free pass. I even called to tell you about it. That's the point, Penelope, he said, his voice steady and restrained. You used something I never gave you. You didn't have my permission to destroy our marriage and put our family's future at risk. Oh, stop being so dramatic, she snapped back. I thought you'd be happy for me. I was wrong. I don't want to discuss this anymore. Where are the kids? They're at my parents', he answered gently. I didn't want them here while we talk about our divorce. Divorce? What do you mean by that? She asked, shocked. Are you really going to destroy our marriage over this? Looking her in the eyes, he spoke as calmly as possible. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. This is absurd, she shouted, her fury rising. You're really willing to throw everything away over one small mistake? It doesn't even matter. You'll just have to get over it. Without another word, he turned and went upstairs to the guest room, locking the door behind him, leaving her standing there in silence. Penelope had been knocking on the door for over an hour, her voice insistently demanding a conversation. I remained silent, not answering. Early in the morning before she woke up, I left and drove straight to my parents. Dad was already up, and over a cup of coffee I laid out everything that had happened. He listened intently, not interrupting until I finished. Finally, he shook his head and murmured, This is a real betrayal. I looked at him, feeling lost. Dad, if you were in my place, what would you do? He took a deep breath. Son, when I was young, things were different. Society has changed. Now people tolerate things that were once considered unacceptable. But I'll tell you this, if your mother had done something like that, I would have ended everything without question. He paused. But you need to decide what's right for you. I nodded, trying to process everything. I don't think I can get over this, Dad. She knew exactly how I feel about these things. A thought crossed my mind about the prenuptial agreement her mother had insisted we sign. What was that about with the prenup her mom wanted? I asked. I remember asking her about it at the wedding, and she just said she had her reasons. Dad nodded thoughtfully. Her mother went through a hard time. Her husband was unfaithful. She wanted Penelope to have some kind of protection. Funny, it seems Penelope has forgotten about that. He smirked. Are you going to remind her? I nodded slowly. In time. Right now I just want to see if she'll even admit to it. She's acting like nothing happened, as if I should just let it go. Dad sighed heavily, looking at me closely. It sounds like she doesn't even regret it or think she did anything wrong. By 9 in the morning, my phone started ringing incessantly. Penelope was calling and texting, demanding to know where I was. I ignored her, staying close to Dad. Then our daughter Riley came into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. Dad, Mom keeps asking where you are and why you're ignoring her. I looked at her, curious. Did she say anything else? Riley thought for a moment. She kept asking what you told us. She wanted to know if you said anything to us about what's going on. Did something happen between you two? She was persistent, refusing to let me evade the question. Whose fault is it, yours or hers? I exhaled, impressed by her insight. "That's a question better asked to your mother," I finally replied, not wanting to fill her mind with accusations. But Riley seemed to already be drawing her own conclusions. Wasting no time, Riley took out her phone, put it on speaker, and called her mother. "Dad's here with me." "So did you cheat on him?" We heard Penelope hesitate on the other end of the line. "What? I don't know what he told you, but that's not true," she replied defensively. Riley cut her off. "He didn't say anything, Mom, but I feel it. Just admit it. Did you cheat?" There was a long pause, and finally Penelope replied, "No, I didn't cheat. If he's saying I did, he's lying." Riley shook her head and ended the call, looking at me sadly. "I'm sorry, Dad. I can't believe she could do this to you." With quiet determination, Riley walked away, her voice firm. "I guess you're going to divorce her. You always taught us to value honesty." I watched her go, feeling a bitter mix of pride and pain. Dad placed a strong hand on my shoulder. "She's a smart girl. She'll get through this." "I wish I could say the same for myself," I said quietly. An hour later, there was a loud knock at the door. Dad opened it and without hesitation firmly told Penelope, "This is not the place for you right now." "Mr. Scott," I said with uncertainty, "today might not be the best day for a visit. I don't know what your son has told you, but whatever it was, it's just not true. I haven't done anything wrong." Mr. Scott's expression remained unchanged. "Say what you want, Penelope," he replied coldly. "But regardless, you're not welcome here." Penelope smirked and retorted, "Tell him I'm innocent," before dashing out of the room. "And if he thinks otherwise, he'll regret it." After she left, I glanced over at my father, who was already in the kitchen. "She looked furious," I muttered. "Be careful, son," he warned, his voice filled with seriousness. "I've seen that look in her eyes before. She's cornered, and people who feel trapped can be unpredictable. She won't give up easily. If you have any evidence, keep it safe." That evening, when the kids and I returned, Penelope was silent. I spent yet another night in the guest room, though at least this time she didn't knock on the door. The next morning, I sat alone at the kitchen table, sipping coffee while the kids got ready for school. I knew I couldn't avoid this confrontation forever. When Penelope finally joined me in the kitchen, her calm demeanor almost made me doubt all my suspicions. "Did the kids get to school all right?" she asked, pouring herself coffee. I nodded. "Why are you sleeping in the guest room? Are you not feeling well?" "You know exactly why," I replied, losing my patience. "I'm not going to share a bed with someone who betrayed me." Her face turned hard. "What do you mean?" "Let's not pretend, Penelope. Are you really going to deny your affair with that soap opera star?" She held my gaze, her eyes growing cold. "Michael, I don't know what game you're playing, but you're making accusations you can't prove." "Just admit it," I said, my voice trembling, her face twisted with anger. "You're going to regret this, Michael. You know you have nothing on me." "Then consider this a declaration of war," I replied in a steady tone. "That's your choice, not mine. We could go back to how things were if you just let this go," she said icily. "But the choice is yours. I'm willing to put these ridiculous accusations behind us." "I'm sorry, Penelope, but I can't just turn a blind eye to what's happened." "Fine. I'm innocent, and you have no proof," she replied with a frosty tone. "Keep pushing, and you'll regret it. Drop it, and we can move forward." There was a veiled threat in her words, but I stayed silent. Instead, I gathered my things and left the house, pretending to head to work. In truth, I had already called in sick. After making sure Penelope had left for school, where she worked, I returned home, determined to uncover whatever she might be hiding. Her threat echoed in my mind. If she was prepared for a fight, I needed to gather all the evidence I could. Once, my sister Emma had mentioned that Penelope had boasted about getting an autograph from the soap boy. If she had been proud enough to flaunt it, she probably hadn't thrown it away. After nearly 2 hours of searching, I found it. In the depths of her closet, Hidden in an old briefcase, I stumbled upon what I needed. The case was locked, but she always used the same code. Beneath a stack of folders, I found a signed photo. The message on the front was innocent enough. To my friend Penelope, Sebastian Hill. But when I turned it over, there was another message, unambiguous. You were amazing in bed, Sebastian. I scanned the photo and carefully placed it back exactly as it had been. I went to meet with my lawyer, meticulously prepared. I brought a copy of the scanned documents, our prenuptial agreement, a recording of a call from Penelope's friend, and a recording of Penelope's own confession. Each document was duplicated on 2 flash drives. I had chosen my lawyer carefully, Addison Harris, an experienced divorce attorney known for her uncompromising approach to cases involving betrayal. As soon as we sat down, I detailed Penelope's actions and outlined exactly how I envisioned the course of the case. When I finished, Addison leaned back, a glint in her eye. I like your approach, Ruthless, she said. You're setting a trap and won't spring it until she has no chance to escape. It'll be tough, though, until we show the evidence. People might think you're overreacting or paranoid. That works for me. I want her to feel safe until the very last moment, I replied, shaking her hand as she assured me she'd prepare the papers and arrange to serve them to Penelope at her workplace, the school. She gave me a few tasks to work on in the meantime. First, go through your credit card statements. We need to find out which club she visited with that soap opera actor. Second, get access to her iCloud. There might be photos of her in this Mr. Soap Opera. She's probably smart enough to delete any evidence from her phone, she added, but there's a good chance they're still saved in her iCloud. I went home immediately and accessed Penelope's iCloud on her computer, easily logging in. Right in the photo folder, I found what I was looking for. 3 pictures, 2 with that soap opera guy, and 1 with her friend Eleanor. I saved them onto a flash drive, and as I examined the photos, I noticed the club's name in the background, which further strengthened my position. When I showed Addison the photos, she was pleased. No one should know under any circumstances that we have these photos, she advised. Her plan was to serve Penelope the divorce papers at school on Friday afternoon, giving me the chance to take the kids to my parents for the weekend. She also emphasized that, regardless of what Penelope did or said, I needed to stay in the house. On Friday, after dropping the kids off at my parents', I ignored the flood of calls and messages from Penelope and went back home. Barely 5 minutes had passed when she stormed in, furious. I waited for her in the living room, discreetly recording on my voice recorder when I heard the garage doors open. "You conniving jerk!" she hissed, stomping toward me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I tried to respond, but she cut me off, her anger peaking. "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you, Michael? Is your ego that fragile?" She launched into a tirade, accusing me of humiliating her in front of her colleagues, vowing I would regret everything. A divorce? Fine, but you'll regret this. You know you won't be able to prove adultery, and without that, I'll take everything from you. Was it worth it? Her voice dripped with contempt. Are you really that insecure? Can't handle that I had some fun with a well-known guy? You could have let it go, but no, you had to ruin everything. I remained silent, letting her vent, watching as she assumed she had the upper hand. Finally, she turned to me again, her irritation flaring anew. "So, when are you moving out?" she demanded. "I'm not going anywhere," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze. "Oh, you'll leave," she countered. "You wanted this divorce, so start packing." She glared at me, expecting me to cave, but I remained seated, keeping a calm expression. "Fine," she eventually muttered. "When this is all over, you'll wish you'd left things as they were." The next month was tense. Penelope and I hardly spoke, and the atmosphere in the house grew noticeably colder. Gradually, she began turning the kids against me, even convincing Riley that her mother was blameless. She spread rumors, claiming I'd fabricated everything, painting me as the villain. Her lawyer responded to our motion with a request to penalize her for false accusations. She even sought my eviction from our shared home, but the court denied that request. The case was expedited, reducing the time allotted for interrogations and witness questioning. My attorney questioned Penelope and her friend Eleanor. During their testimonies, Penelope and Eleanor both claimed that Penelope had not met with the soap opera actor. They insisted they had never seen him or gone clubbing together. As we prepared for my own questioning, my lawyer emphasized the importance of sticking strictly to the truth without unnecessary details. Her tactic was to make Penelope's lawyer believe we had no evidence of infidelity and therefore avoid questions on that topic. Indeed, as she predicted, they focused on whether I had personally witnessed Penelope's infidelity without inquiring about any evidence. It seemed they genuinely believed in her innocence regarding my accusations. At the hearing, Penelope appeared calm and confident. I testified, describing her infidelity and my objections to marital unfaithfulness and the concept of open relationships. During cross-examination, they revisited topics from my questioning, confirming that I hadn't attended Penelope's conference or seen her in compromising situations. On the stand, Penelope declared her innocence and, like me, expressed her disapproval of infidelity, denying any interest in permission for unfaithfulness. Then her lawyer called Eleanor, who confirmed that the alleged incident with the soap actor hadn't occurred. When I looked at Eleanor's husband, Mason, I noticed him avert his gaze. Eleanor grew visibly nervous when my lawyer began questioning her about an alleged phone call to her husband, where she mentioned that Penelope had left with the actor. Despite her unease, Eleanor stuck to her story, completely denying the incident. When she finished, Penelope and her lawyer looked smug. He asserted that we had no additional evidence and demanded sanctions for baseless accusations. The judge began to criticize my lawyer for the apparent lack of evidence when suddenly Mrs. Harris, my lawyer, calmly stood. "Your Honor, I apologize," she interjected. "We do have evidence to refute their claims." Penelope's lawyer immediately objected. "Objection. We were not notified of any rebuttal evidence." Mrs. Harris responded calmly. "We are not required to disclose rebuttal evidence. Had their witnesses spoken the truth, this wouldn't be necessary." The judge allowed her to proceed, and Mrs. Harris called her investigator to the stand. "Your Honor," she announced, "we acknowledge that Mrs. Scott was not involved with Sebastian Hill." This admission took me by surprise, but Mrs. Harris gestured for me to remain calm. Then her investigator testified that Sebastian Hill was in Europe during Penelope's conference. Penelope's lawyer quickly seized upon this, claiming it was definitive proof of her innocence, and demanded the case be closed with sanctions against me. But Mrs. Harris, smiling, continued, "No, we're not claiming she didn't commit infidelity. We're merely stating it wasn't with Sebastian Hill." Then she called Eleanor back to the stand and asked if she had accompanied Penelope at the conference and met with a man they mistook for Sebastian Hill. Eleanor continued to deny this. My lawyer pressed further, referencing a phone call in which Eleanor allegedly told her husband that Penelope had left with a man who wasn't her husband. Despite being reminded of her oath, Eleanor continued to deny that such a call had occurred. I exchanged a glance with Mason, who silently mouthed, "Sorry," I replied, "you'll regret this." At that moment, my lawyer produced a recording of Eleanor's conversation. Penelope's lawyer immediately objected, but Mrs. Harris explained that I was a guest in the witness's home and could overhear the conversation. The judge asked Eleanor to confirm if it was her voice on the recording. With no way out, she admitted it was indeed her. At that moment, I felt immense relief, as irrefutable evidence had proven my claims. Penelope was then called back to the stand, and she continued to deny making any confessions after returning from the conference. Her denial crumbled when my lawyer presented a video of Penelope vividly describing her time with another man, leaving her stunned and speechless. When Penelope wiped her tears, the courtroom stirred as a series of selfies and a signed photograph were presented as key evidence. She was about to leave the witness stand when the judge, noticing the details, called her back. "Counsel, there's one thing I don't understand," he declared with a confident gaze. You argue that Mrs. Scott did not have an intimate relationship with Sebastian Hill, yet the evidence presented suggests otherwise. In response, Mrs. Harris called her detective to the stand. Your Honor, our investigation indeed revealed that Mrs. Scott cheated on her husband, but not with the person she thought. The detective presented a set of surveillance photos taken at a nightclub. The photos showed Penelope with a man she left the club with that night. However, as the detective explained, this man was not Sebastian Hill. He turned out to be his lookalike, a notorious con artist known for seducing married women. The situation worsened upon the revelation that he had been diagnosed with several sexually transmitted diseases. Penelope's face changed, and it became evident to everyone in the room that she was in shock as the reality of what happened became clear. After a brief recess, the judge returned and delivered a stern lecture on the importance of honesty and fidelity. He recognized Penelope's actions as a breach of her marriage contract and confirmed the terms of the agreement. But he didn't stop there. Addressing Penelope directly, the judge stated that even if there had been no marriage contract, he would still have granted custody of the children to her husband. Calling her unfit for parenting due to her prolonged deception, he requested that she remain in place. He then turned to her friend Eleanor, who had also sworn to tell the truth. The oath before this court is sacred, he proclaimed, fixing her with a severe gaze. No matter the reason, a lie is still a lie in my courtroom. If this were a criminal case, you'd both be going to jail. He then found them both guilty of perjury and fined them the maximum sum of $10,000 for contempt of court. When Penelope left the courthouse, she faced a new ordeal. A local news crew, tipped off by her ex-husband's lawyer, was waiting with cameras rolling. Mrs. Scott, the reporter asked persistently, would you like to comment on losing your family over a fleeting affair with a celebrity lookalike? This final blow took its toll, and consumed by rage, she lunged at the reporter. The scene quickly descended into chaos. Penelope tackled the journalist to the ground, pulling her hair. A police officer on the scene was forced to use a stun gun to subdue her, all of which was captured on camera. By the evening, the footage had become a national news sensation. Penelope didn't witness her viral moment. By then, she was in county jail, where she was sentenced to spend 7 months. In her absence, no other woman had replaced her. I focused on raising our 2 children alone, and when Penelope was finally released, I decided not to rekindle our relationship despite her persistent pleas. My mother pitied her and urged me to give her a second chance, reminding me that Penelope had lost her career and her reputation in society. After 3 months of endless calls and messages, I finally agreed to meet her at her mother's. Sitting in silence, I listened as Penelope poured out her heart. She confessed her love, her desire to reunite our family, and her regret over her mistakes. Due to the assault charge, she was now permitted only limited, supervised contact with our children. With tears in her eyes, she apologized for her actions, feeling shame and remorse for having fallen victim to a con artist. She concluded her plea with a promise that, if given another chance, she would be the best wife I could ever wish for. Taking a deep breath, I stood and looked at her intently. Penelope, that was a sincere apology, I said. I believe you said it from the heart. You've acknowledged your mistakes. You say you miss our family and that you love me. And yes, I believe you. What speaks the loudest is what was left unsaid. You never apologized or showed any regret for breaking the vows we exchanged on our wedding day. As far as I can see, the only thing you truly regret is not being with the person you really wanted. Honestly, I doubt you feel any genuine remorse for your infidelity, or even consider it a betrayal. As for your question, my answer is clear. No. I will not come back to you, now or ever. I want you to completely stop any contact with me. If you persist, I'll have no choice but to reinstate the restraining order issued after your arrest. At this, Penelope began to cry and abruptly stood up. I'm sorry that I enjoyed it. Is that what you want to hear? But for me, it was already over. I was ready to draw the line. Go on and live your life. Just know that I won't be in it anymore. You slept with an HIV-positive person. You didn't even think to take precautions. You brought that risk into our family. You're a lying cheater who thinks only of herself. Goodbye." I turned and walked away, leaving Penelope screaming after me while her mother tried to restrain her. After the divorce, she was left with what she came into the marriage with, which was $10,000. Our children despised her for the disgrace. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.